Well, good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. This is the day that the Lord has made, and I choose to rejoice and be glad in it. Welcome to the platform of Project 365, where we are committed to bringing you messages of hope, encouragement, and inspiration. Let's welcome our guests. Well, matter of fact, let's back up. Back up. We're going to welcome Takira, who is my co-host first. And,
Hello.
and then we're going to welcome our guests momentarily. But before we even do that, I wanted to make sure I'm going to extend the invitation to you to go to our YouTube channel
Yes.
to subscribe so that we can take this message of hope, encouragement, and inspiration around the world. Around the world, because everyone who has breath in their body, they need hope, encouragement, and inspiration, especially during the times that we live in. So I am grateful to God for the opportunity to bring you our guest today so that you will, not just you and I will have more insight on what's going on around us in our world on today. Many times people think um, situations, problems, heartaches, tears, and all of that is more so far away from us. But let me tell you, it's in our homes, it's in our backyards, it's in our community. And today's topic is human trafficking and child sexual abuse. And you may not know anyone directly, but indirectly, you may know someone. However, we are here to enlighten you, to give you some information, to let you know what to look out for, because it is happening in our community. It is happening in our city. It is happening in our state. And I pray that we don't stick our heads in the sand and pretend or act like it doesn't happen or it doesn't occur in our areas. So today I want to take this opportunity to yield the platform to our guest, who is Iona Rudisill. She has extensive knowledge in this particular area. Matter of fact, over 26 years of this particular work. And I know, as I promised, the messages that we bring will be from individuals who are well informed, those that have knowledge about situations. We just want everyone to know what is going on with our world on today. She's going to share so much more about what she does, and how she interacts with individuals. And we're just glad to have you on board. And let's take this second to yield the floor to you. You got it, Iona.
Thank you, Portia and Takira. It is an honor to be a part of Project 365. And yes, I'm just going to talk to you a little bit about human trafficking and also that intersectionality with child sexual abuse. And so this is the month of January, which has been deemed and dedicated as the National Slavery and Human Trafficking Prevention Month. Started back in 2010 when our president uh, realized that we just wanted to have our country be more aware of this crime. However,
Mm.
what I always like to say is that human trafficking didn't start when the Trafficking Victim Protection Act came about in 2000, um, but it actually started all the way back in biblical days. We can go back as
Mm.
far as Genesis 37, when Joseph actually was sold by his brothers for 20 shekels of silver, which would equal today about $400. And he was sold because his brothers actually were jealous of him.
Yeah.
So, what exactly is human trafficking? Specifically and very clearly, it is slavery, it is bondage, it is the recruitment, the um, receipt, transportation, and harboring of any human being for someone else's commercial pleasure, whether
Mm.
that be for sex or whether that be for labor. The history of human trafficking, like I said, didn't start with the laws that were coming out from our nation, but actually in the biblical days. The first law that actually took place for human trafficking was 1910, which was the Mann Act. The Mann Act actually was to be placed in for protection for women who were actually traveling from one jurisdiction to another, one country to another. And so for the purposes of sex.
Mm-mm.
And the history of that behind the Mann Act was the fact that it was to protect specifically white women who may be being engaged in sexual encounters with a Black or colored man. So that's
Mm.
how that all transpired. And it is still a law on the books. And the National Survivors Network of those who have been victimized through trafficking steadily continue to try to fight that and try to get that one off the books. One of the things, too, is that during the ancient Greece and Roman times, we found out that there were priests who actually would use boys. They would buy and purchase boys, prepubescent boys, for their own sexual pleasure. And sometimes they would trade these boys. And these boys were called catamites. So I just give that to you because sometimes when people hear about human trafficking, they think about it as in something that is international, something that only happens across the seas, something that only happens in maybe an Asian continent or Central America or Africa. It happens everywhere. It happens in our backyards. It
Yeah.
happens here. It happens in the state of Maryland. It happens in Baltimore. One of the things is that in 2000, when the Trafficking Victim Protection Act, it basically, federal government said, you know what, we need to look a little bit closer at this crime, and that we recognize that it's not just a crime that is affecting just those who are on the international borders, but it also impacts and affects those here in the United States. So the TVPA was one that is set up that actually can now provide some type of protection, and laws were enacted to protect those who were actually being trafficked on the domestic soil, meaning right here within the United States. And statistics from the Department of Justice,
Mhm.
as well as the Department of State, basically state that there are more individuals who are being trafficked right now domestically on the United States soil.
Wow.
There have been during the
Wow.
transatlantic slave trade.
Wow.
So that is, there's been some research that has been happening so that they're seeing that intersectionality between the transatlantic slave trade as well as human trafficking. So one of the things that people will say sometimes, where they'll be like, okay, they'll look at it just as prostitution. It's so much more than that. Like I said, there's sex, there's labor, and there's so many other areas that an individual can be victimized through being exploited, whether they're being sold or whether they're being bought and
Mhm.
purchased. So the one thing is that it's the devaluement of a human being. Why would it be that some human, that some person, that some organization, that some entity would think that it is okay to purchase another person for their own gratification? Like I said, whether that would be for sexual or whether that would be for labor.
Mhm.
That is not God's plan. That was never God's purpose for the human being. That was never God's purpose for the creative workmanship. One of the things that we do when you talk about the laws that have been enacted, there's a big difference. The TVPA, the Trafficking Victim Protection Act, also says that you do not need force, fraud, or coercion for a child who is 17 years or younger for there to be a prosecution of trafficking. And that's one thing to also bring enlightenment to, because sometimes people think that you need to have that. Well, one of the things that we like to share in the field, as I have been a professional specifically working with individuals who have been trafficked
Mhm.
for almost 20 years now,
Wow.
of being able to see that there are things, every person who comes in, every child, even though you don't need force, fraud, or coercion, The elements of force, fraud, and coercion are there because traffickers are expert manipulators. They're master manipulators. They're very strategic. They know exactly what they're trying to do and the purpose that they're trying to gain, and the fact that they are looking at an individual as a commodity. They're looking at an individual as an object. They're not looking at that individual as that creative masterpiece that God has created them to be and someone of value and worth, but they're looking at them just for their own profit and only for their gain. So as we interwove to make sure that we can provide services, even in the state of Maryland, our first trafficking law in the state of Maryland was 2007. The first trafficking law that was set just for youth was 2012. And
Mm.
from that, service providers were able to see that, you know what, we need to make this their own a child trafficking law under the statute of child maltreatment. And so it came under its own heading in 2017, which was absolutely something that was just allowing us to move more progressively. The interesting thing about that is I said that was for child trafficking, and it was specifically for child sex trafficking. It wasn't until 2020 that Maryland actually passed its first labor
What?
trafficking law. So we are
2020?
now 2020, which was the
Wow.
last year. Now there have
Yeah.
been conversations about that.
Mhm.
We've been speaking to legislation and doing that. You've had survivor leaders who have been actually testifying in the Maryland General Assembly, letting them know that not only does sex trafficking exist in the state of Maryland, so does labor trafficking, and we have to have a better response to it. So we needed to look into it. So now there's a task force for labor trafficking that is really delving into what exactly does it present, how does it present? How does it present in the state of Maryland so that we can respond accordingly? One of the things, another thing that I just wanted to bring out too is survivor leadership. There have been so many survivors who have been victimized through this crime, and their voices have been silenced sometimes. Their voices have not been heard. They've been misunderstood. They've been misinterpreted. And there is now a movement that started back in the 80s where survivor leaders were actually taking the stand to move forward and say, this is happening. This has happened to them, and that they wanted to be able to educate the service providers, education, the churches on how to actually respond. So now that movement is getting even more ground, and it's
Good.
continuously growing and expanding. And so one of the resources I wanted to share was that the Maryland Survivor Network can be reached. If there's someone who is listening who thinks that they might have been victimized through trafficking, or that they know somebody, they can reach out to the Maryland Survivor Network at gmail.com. That's MD Survivor Network at gmail.com. Also, you can gather a lot of resources from the Maryland Human Trafficking Task Force, and that's Maryland Human Trafficking, marylandhumantrafficking.org. There are different agencies, national agencies around. Like, for example, if you know somebody, regardless of where you are in the state or even in the country, if you know somebody who is being trafficked, someone who is being enslaved, someone who is in bondage, someone who doesn't know where their next meal is coming from, someone who has been sold, someone who has their identification that has been taken away from them, and they don't even know how to use it, or um, what to do. Someone who has been sold 10, 15, 20, 25 times in one evening and just
Oh
wants to get
my.
out and doesn't know. Someone who has been locked up in a basement and has been working for 15 and 18 hours in a day. Someone, if you're knowing someone like that, or you yourself have experienced something like that, you can reach out to the National Human Trafficking Hotline, which is 1-888-3737-888. And it has just a breadth of resources right there. There's organizations like the Shared Hope of International, which works for all youth all children who have experienced 17 years and younger, who have experienced sex trafficking, specifically sex trafficking. And that's across the nation. And then there's groups like the National Center of Missing and Exploited Children, also known as NCMEC, where you can get so much information like missing kids, www.missingkids.org. And parents, you're able to look on to missing kids on a tab called NetSmart. It's NetSmart will be able to provide parents and caretakers and service providers and friends and families about how to actually tools that they can use to help them with online, how to keep your children safe while being online. Because right now, while we're in this pandemic and digital learning, education is there, we also understand that there are some great people out there online, and the website is great and is a great tool, but it's
Mhm.
also a tool for predators,
Yes.
unfortunately. And
Mhm.
so right now what happens is because everybody's online right now, this
Mm-mm-mm.
has now become like a virtual playground for predators
Yeah.
where they can look at children. So NetSmarts actually provides those tools and teaches parents and service providers and community leaders on how to keep youth safe, what things that they can do when they're looking on the internet, when they're searching things, what type of communication they need to do, and how much information they should share and what information they should
They
not
should
be
not.
sharing, where
Mhm.
they should be placing their computers. So these are all elements and so important. And then that intersectionality with child sexual abuse, what they found is that that's a high vulnerability. If a youth has been sexually abused by a family member or a community member, unfortunately, it brings them into a place of lower self-esteem.
Mhm.
And then perhaps
Mhm.
they might want to go missing. Perhaps they want to go and leave their place of safety because they don't have a place of safety. They don't know a place of safety. So they start running away, which means there's so many missing persons reports that are filed for them. And as they do that, that now puts them in a place where they are now open and vulnerable to unsuspected dangers. I'll just say it like that,
Mhm.
unsuspected dangers. And remember, a child, the brain is not fully developed until they are 25. There's research now that says 25, where the prefrontal cortex, which is the last piece of the brain, is actually being developed. So the way that youth actually reason and compute information and how they actually speak about things is going to be totally different than how an adult of 30-year-olds or a 40-year-old would actually gather information and share that information. So I know I shared a lot of information today. There was one other website I wanted
Sure.
to share,
Mhm.
which was Empower Her Network, which is also a national network for survivors that helps them get job placements. They work with service providers who are specifically working within the field of human trafficking, and they pair them with a mentor that actually a caseworker mentor that walks with them, and they become now a part of a community. There are faith-based organizations here in Maryland, for example, Araminta Freedom Initiative. There is community organizations like Turnaround in the city of Baltimore. So there are a lot of different resources out there, and you can find these by going to the Maryland Human Trafficking website. So, uh, was there anything else or
Yeah.
any other
I
questions?
I had a question. What are some of the effects that you may have seen as a result of human trafficking once someone comes out of it?
So you might see some things like depression, feelings of isolation, feelings of fear, feelings of anger, not knowing if you have been. There have been some youth who I've worked with in the past who have actually been trafficked by a family member, and
Mm.
so uh, their trust. They don't have that same strong, it takes them a long time to trust another person. And that trust has to be built up. That trust has to be strengthened. It has to be earned. Trust has to be earned again because it has already been dismantled. And even sometimes just the physical things that you see, if they've been victimized through sex or labor trafficking and they've been working for so long, working like 18 hours in the course of a 24-hour day, and they're not sleeping that well and they're not eating that well, well, then you might have some nerve damage in the legs. You might have some pain in your feet. There have been situations where they've had to have surgeries for some of those survivors who were coming out because they were unable to stand in a certain posture because there was so much damage that was done to their feet. There might be instances of dental, that they would need dental care, they would need vision. So they would need a spectrum of public health services. They would need a spectrum of educational services. They'd need a spectrum of community services that will assist them, job placement. If they've never worked in another job, if they don't even know how to do an interview. So there are all these different things that would be needed and would be beneficial for them to have. So it'd be a group of services surrounding one individual in a community field.
Now I'm asking you my last question, then I turn it over to Takira. What is the youngest that you have? Matter of fact, I got two questions. One, what is the youngest? What is the youngest you've seen? This is, it just does something to your heart, you know? What is the youngest? And do you find that these individuals are trafficked in certain locations?
Great questions. The youngest that I've ever worked with has been one who was just shy of their 2-year-old, their two year
Shut up. No.
That was one of the first cases I had when I came into the field, and it was of a little, like I said, a little bit younger than 2 years old, and this child's mother was selling them for heroin. So that child, when I received the case for an investigation, that particular child actually had 5 STIs, sexually transmitted infections. That child was able to be removed from their present home and is thriving. And then when you talk about different areas, it happens everywhere. Some people will say that it only happens in impoverished areas, it only happens in low income areas. There are no boundaries to human trafficking. It happens in every socioeconomic status, in every neighborhood, in every county, in every city, in every state, and in every country.
Well, Miss Iona, I want to thank you so much for coming and sharing this with us. As you know, personally, this is something that is a passion of mine. You specifically helped me with getting resources when I was in school. So my thesis I did in school, I was a architecture design student. So we had to pick an issue in the world and design a solution for it. So, everyone's picking all these, wonderful things and they were really good. And I said, well, guys, I'm designing a resource retreat for the survivors of human trafficking. And if you could have seen everyone's face looking back at me like, what? Like, that doesn't happen here. And I'm like, yes, it does. And this was 5 years ago. And they were looking at me like, girl, what do you mean? So just because one semester you had to, present all the information. The second semester you had to design for it. And if you could have just seen their face and how much they were so shocked at, oh my gosh, this happens not only in the US, but this happens in Maryland, or this happens in my neighborhood. And I'm like, yeah, like it doesn't just happen in the city, like this happens everywhere. So I really appreciate you coming on here to spread awareness to people, because unfortunately it's 5 years later from when I did my presentation and people don't know, it feels like even more than they did back then. It's like, don't shut your eyes and close your doors to the situation, because like you said, it's just growing and growing. So one thing we are going to do is we are going to put those resources in the comment section below, so you guys can have those to utilize. And I would say just to get started, if you want to help with this situation, because it's such a big issue that is worldwide, and it can seem very overwhelming. Like, what can I do? But the little actions that you take really
Yes.
can help. So I would say just look at the resources we're going to post. You can volunteer, you can help spread the word out, and share information so that people will understand the signs of someone who's being human trafficked, so that you can maybe call attention to it, or contact the correct authorities to it. And also, working at an airport, I worked at an airport. We had to get human traffic training, and you will not believe, like, once you are taught the signs to look, that it happens so often right under
Wow.
your nose. So I would just really encourage you to just check out those resources, and don't think that you're just one little person that can't help, because you really can. And just changing or helping one person or helping one life, that's really all it takes. Like, if everyone just tried and did that little effort, you will not believe the impact that we would have locally and globally, So I just want to encourage you guys to do that. Like I said, this is such a big issue on my heart. I love children. So I don't think anyone should have to go through this, but especially someone who's, looking at adults for guidance, for,
Right.
you naturally trust people, and you're just trying to be a kid. Like, nobody should have to go through this. No man, woman, boy, or girl should have anyone say what they have to do with their body or with their life. Like, you should have a choice. And that's why it's such a big passion of mine. Like, who are you to say that I have to be sold? I'm worth this little bit amount of money, and now I have to do A, B, and C. I just really don't like that. So I encourage everyone, please check out those resources. You really can make a big difference.
Thank you so much, Takira. That was wonderful. Thank you so much. And you shared what I could have shared. I couldn't share it like you did. Of course, you're just so good at that. I
You're
love
so
it, love it,
silly.
love it. That's why God put us together. But thanks again, Iona. I do appreciate all of your information that you shared. And I pray that the individuals who are viewing now, or who may view a little later, that we do more than just pray. I know we can pray. That's a big component of it. But I think there's something, if we reach out, there is something that we can do. All right. Thank you so much. And we will see you tomorrow with another message of hope, encouragement, and inspiration. Bye-bye.